Happy Wednesday, Pacer Nation. Hope you guys are all doing well, recovering after the Pacer season ended. We heard from a ton of different players after the game was over. And on Tuesday, throughout the day, we heard from Ben Mather and Tyrese Halliburton. But today, Facci, we're going to be focusing solely on what Chad Buchanan had to say at his end-of-season presser, because he is one of the main guys going along with making this team, what it is, and building this team. So I thought it was good to kind of hear from him after this long playoff run and kind of get his thoughts on things. But just kind of a weird day after the Pacers' long run comes to an end.
Just shows life goes on quickly. You gotta roll with the punches. We went from, hey, the conference finals to just kind of recapping the season in a blink of an eye. I think Chad always does a good job. Never dodges questions. Never gives too much. Never gives too little. Always finds the right way to answer. What's being asked. But I thought, I thought this was a different type of end of the season press conference than in the previous. There's a lot to look forward to instead of a lot of mystery like in the past.
Yeah, for sure. And I will say this, it was not a very crowded press room. It was Tony East, Dustin Dopiriak, and Jeremiah Johnson. Those are the only three that were asking questions. So maybe there was more people there that did not ask questions, but those were the three that asked questions. There's about 16 total questions in today's press conference. So we're going to go ahead and jump into those questions. We put them in a little bit different order than what they were on the YouTube channel and how those reporters asked them, but just wanted to kind of break it down a little bit easier. So, Facci, the first one we're going to look at is the keys to accelerating the rebuild. Here's what Chad Buchanan had to say.
I got to first give credits to Coach Carlisle and his staff. I mean, they've bought into a longer-term outlook, with this team. They've committed themselves to getting our young players better every day. You guys are here. You see them before practice, after practice, and they are out here working, sweating with these guys. And so that growth and development has been a big part of how we've gotten to where we're at. Our veterans have been great locker room guys. They've been very productive on the court, from TJ to Miles, Pascal, James Johnson in his own way. Those guys have been instrumental in building a culture of, positivity every day when you come into the gym, belief in each other, a togetherness. You watch our team play. I think we watch our team play every day, so you kind of take for granted the togetherness, the unselfishness, the ball moving as much as it does, because you see it every single day. And then you talk to other teams and other personnel, and we're at the NBA draft interviewing kids for the combine, and they're talking about how fast we play, how much the ball moves, and you kind of like take it for granted until you hear other people talk about your team. And so really it goes back to our coaching staff for creating this culture. And we've got great leadership in the locker room and guys who love being around each other. And that makes for an 82-game season. You don't want it to end. There's seasons where you guys maybe don't like being around each other and they don't share the ball. And it's guys come in moody into the gym. And 82 games can feel like 800 games. And it just feels like you're just ready for it to end. Whereas I think last night in that locker room, nobody wanted the season to end. And that's just reflective of the culture that Rick and the coaches have built here.
So, I mean, honestly, I thought that was a good answer. I think by Chad, it's the right balance. It's about a young group that wants to work hard. It's about the coaching staff that's in place to get the best out of the youth. It's having that balance of veterans as well that he mentioned about Pascal Siakam and even guys like James Johnson, other guys, TJ McConnell. I think the Pacers have that right chemistry or balance, however you want to sum it up, to be a team that enjoys playing with each other. And I think that that's something that was not the case in previous years. Yeah, this group didn't want things to come to an end. And I think that as a fan base, neither did we. We weren't ready for this season to end. And it shows that this fan base is ready for more. They want to see this team run it back. And I think that's a good spot to be in.
I like that he said Coach Carlisle and his staff kind of embraced this rebuild and knowing that it was going to take some time to get there. And I think what's interesting is because it was kind of accelerated a little bit here because of the success they had early on, I think that because everybody was so bought in on developing, it just made everybody bought into the system. And so it kind of like reflects throughout the season how hard these guys play, because not only did they develop, but they started believing in themselves. They started overachieving. They started really kind of raising that bar for what this team could be. And so we know, we've seen previous Pacer teams when the season feels like it's going south, or there's guys that are a little bit sour with everything, they get knocked out in the first round. They don't come together and take care of business. But when a team is truly connected like that, you can definitely feel that.
You can, and this team is very young, but I also feel that a lot of these young players put together their best seasons thus far in their career. I mean, I know some of these guys were mentioned, but like at some point, in this clip at least, but like Aaron Neesmith had a career year. Jalen Smith had, you could say a career year or a major bounce back year. Isaiah Jackson, Andrew Nemhart, Matherin had his moments. I feel like you saw a lot of players that are young that are still getting better, and we have every right to believe that they will continue to get better next year and so on, because a lot of these players are 22, 23 years old, and they are far from their prime.
Absolutely. And I think this experience is really key, Facci, for this growth of this team. And next on our clips here, Chad Buchanan is going to talk about the experience of playing in a playoff run like this, what it means to be in a playoff setting, and the toll that it takes on you having a deep playoff run. So let's hear what Chad had to say here next after this question.
It's hard to replicate a playoff setting for a young team, for a young player. As we go through our exit interviews today, as you asked our players, what are you going to take away from this experience? And I think almost all of them, especially our young guys, said, I didn't realize the intensity it takes for every single possession for all 48 minutes. And I think that is something it's hard to replicate in training camp. You can't do it in the regular season, preseason, until you get in a playoff setting where guys are literally playing for their playoff lives and their seasons are on the line. Do you feel that amount of urgency that comes from playing against another team? So I think what our young guys got to go through over these last 3 playoff series, I think put in their mind how hard they got to train in the offseason. A lot of guys I think maybe felt like maybe we ran out a little bit of gas. They were a little fatigued because of the long. You played an extra, whatever we played, 18 games, whatever we played. And I think that took a toll on some of them physically, and I think that'll impact how they train in the offseason. So that's one benefit I think that we'll see, that our players couldn't anticipate or no way to prepare for that. But the intensity of a playoff game, of a playoff series against, like we saw, the Boston, team, that's a team that's built to win a championship. We got to experience that. It's hard to put a value on that, to put a label of what that means to a young group. Minnesota's got a young team as well. Like I said, there's plenty of other young teams out there. And it's going to be a challenge next year to get back to this spot. But that's the goal, and the goal is eventually go beyond it.
I think the best experience, Facci, is just, the best way to get experience is just by going through that process, right? And hearing these guys even tell Chad maybe in the exit interviews that maybe they were just a little bit gassed. And it's kind of crazy to think about, but this team plays so fast and they run so much. They've already got to be in great shape, but playing literally every other day for almost a month and a half, it's probably exhausting. And especially when you get deep into a playoff series, one go in 6 games, one go in 7 games. The last one only went 4, but still those deep runs early on, that probably did take a little bit of a toll on this group that was not probably mentally or physically prepared for that type of run that they had. So I think that, to me, wasn't really stood out there. And hopefully we see this team come back in better shape than they already were, which I think this is a pretty in shape team.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, this team was able to run a ton of teams into the ground, but playing an extra month and a half of not only basketball, but high intensity playoff basketball, where Chad mentioned every possession, the magnitude of each possession is just through the roof. And that's kind of what came down to, in this series against Boston, the possessions that meant the most at the end of the game, when maybe Indiana was at its most tired moment, Boston was able to dig just a little bit deeper and be able to grind out those possessions, get those stops, get that extra rebound that they needed. In Indiana, I think, I don't know if it was gas, but maybe it's like a mental drain. Boston just had a little bit more mentally and potentially even physically to, give to that last final minute of the game where the Pacers just kept coming up short. So yeah, this experience, it is invaluable. You cannot put a price on it. There's nothing you could do to simulate this. This isn't like, the NFL where you could try and simulate the weather or anything like that. There's nothing you can do to simulate playoff basketball. And every single Pacer that got to play in this these playoff series that just happened is coming out as a better player. And for that will translate into the offseason and into next year.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the best learning device ever. It's just the actual hands-on experience. I mean, how many times have you read instructions or been told what to do, but when someone actually shows you and you physically are able to do it, it's just a lot easier to understand and go through that process. It's just like, all right, now I know what I'm getting myself into. So it's very similar to that. But one of the things that Chad did bring up is looking at how Boston is built and basically saying, you know what, like they're built to win a championship, and now they know what they need to kind of raise that bar to. So I love this next question because Chad's going to dive in here now, Facci, into what did this playoff run tell them that this team needs roster wise.
I would say, as you watch the team that eliminates you, it's always fresh in your mind, what they did to beat you. And I think Boston, obviously, they've got, more experience than us, number one, but they have a tremendous defensive foundation. When we needed to try and score these last couple games, it's been very, very challenging. And they really came together and got stops when they needed to. And I think our players really recognize the importance of being able to get stops as you get deeper into the playoffs. And the good teams, when they need to buckle down and make it really challenging for you to get a good look, they do that. And I think our guys, that's one thing that I think we take away that's going to be important for us moving forward if we want to take another step.
Chad was right. Boston does have more experience. I mentioned it last episode. 5 trips to the conference finals in the last 7 years. Yeah, there's no simulating that for Indiana. Boston's been there. Also, Chad was right when he said, they do have a tremendous defensive foundation. A couple of years ago, Boston was the top defensive team in the league. This year, they had a great balance of being one of the best offensive teams in the league, as well as one of the better, defensive units. So I think Indiana was far more, favored on the offensive side of things than they were on the defensive side of things. That was a work in progress all season. And then also, I think Indiana's players did recognize the importance of being able to get stops. Like, that was what we thought of the Pacers defense. They weren't going to be a great defense, but could they get timely stops? In the playoffs against Boston, they not only couldn't get those defensive stops, but they watched Boston be able to get them. In specific, when Boston held Indiana scoreless for the final, 3:32 of Game 4, while Boston went on a little bit of a 7-0 run. So I think those were great points by Chad, and I do hope that the team comes out as a better defensive unit from what they've learned from just how important that is in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, defense is what wins championships, and I know that it's kind of a cliche statement, but it is very true because teams that can stop teams from scoring is what allows you to go back and score yourself. So it is obviously a balance of scoring and keeping other teams from scoring. I'm not going to deny that you got to have a great offense, but there's a reason why Boston was number 1 in offense and number 2 in defense all season long, and they won 64 games in the regular season, and now they've only lost 2 games. They're 12-2 in the playoffs. They've been phenomenal, and that's even without their starting center Kristaps Porzingis for the majority of those games. So, and he just adds another level to their offense and their defense with what he's able to do as well. So, I just think that when you play against this team compared to the other teams Indiana faced on their way to the Eastern Conference Finals, it shows you where those teams don't even have what Boston has. And I think that getting that defensive identity was huge for them. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in this podcast and other things that Chad brought up with like how Boston and Denver kind of built their teams. But, Denver obviously not in the playoffs anymore now, but they won the championship last year. So it's all about how you build your team and things like that. But defense is the key. Rick Carlisle talked about that ad nauseum at the beginning of the year. It was the message all season long. Doesn't matter how great the offense is. Even a hot girl gets kind of boring after a while, right? So if she can't play defense, especially. So that's just kind of where I'm at. And it always comes back to that, Facci. It always comes back to that.
It's true. It was a great quote. It's something a lot of us live by. But, look, I just think that, it's the timely stops. I always think of, when I think of timely stops, I always think of, Ben Mathurin stripping the ball of Giannis in the in-season tournament. And, that was, there wasn't many stops in that game, but that was the big stop. And I think that right there is, you don't have to be a top-notch defensive unit. It definitely helps, but can you get the stops when you need them? That's what really separates a pretty good team from a potentially great team.
Another great question that was asked that Chad talks about here next is there a specific piece you need, or is that piece currently on the roster? So I thought Chad gave a pretty telling answer here, and I think you guys are going to enjoy this one.
Yeah, I think as a front office, you're always looking for ways to improve your team. I also believe that we have a lot of internal growth still ahead for several of our players. We saw some of it this year with several guys that took a big step, and I think there's more room for growth with several of those players. I think some of our veterans have room for growth too. And some of it is just continuity of keeping guys together, the familiarity of playing together, going through experiences like we just went through over the last couple of weeks together will help us be a little more united. But us as a front office, we're always going to look for ways to improve the team. And, that's our ultimate goal, is to win a championship. And if there's something out there that makes sense for us, we feel helps address a need, we'll be aggressive to do that. But we're also very pleased with this group and how they came together, and think that there's still room for development within their own roster as it is today.
All right, Facci. So to me right there, what Chad was saying is we might have the answer on our roster, but we're not opposed to looking to see if that answer is out there on the open market, whether it's free agency, whether it's via trade. I think that they want to keep really all of their options open is what it feels like.
Yeah, look, I think it's a great way to kind of, answer the question, but also, not be too direct, because I do think there is a lot on this team to like. Like, you do have a lot of young pieces that you don't need to make a huge shakeup or anything of the sort. And I think that, we don't need to make this massive splash when this is a good team. You want to add to it. So I think that he was right to say that the young players can still get better. That internal growth is absolutely true. Ben Mathurin could come back and be, you don't want to say twice the player that he is before, but I wouldn't rule it out. Andrew Nemhard's still going to get better. Guys like Neesmith and, who knows, and Jarace Walker have, obviously a large way to continue to grow. The vets, look at the step forward that TJ McConnell took last year. I don't think that some of those guys are done growing. Miles Turner, the last 2 years, has had some really good years. So, but also, just with any front office, they wouldn't be doing their job if they didn't go out there to try and find the right move that could make this team better. And last year, it was 2 second-round picks for Obi Toppin. It was a great low-risk move that helped the bench become the best bench unit in the NBA. So, yeah, I don't think you need to make a massive splash, but can you add to what's already a good roster?
And you can even throw in the fact that they were able to go out there and draft Ben Shepherd and Andrew Nemhard in back-to-back years, really targeting the right people in the draft. And then I think going after a Bruce Brown level of player, getting him on the contract you got him on, so then you could eventually flip him. Like, it was a good player that if you didn't flip him, he could still help this team in this current season. Now, I don't think Bruce Brown ever envisioned this Pacers team making it to the Eastern Conference Finals, but he wanted to get paid. He got paid more money in this contract for 1 year than he'd got paid in his entire NBA career. So it was a great payday for him and a great, earning for him to kind of get all that money. But on the flip side, Indiana realized, okay, maybe we are a little bit more ahead of schedule than we thought. Let's flip him for a guy like Pascal Siakam, who can really kind of accelerate this rebuild once again. But I just thought, you know what? It's interesting to kind of just see how they're opportunistic, but they don't really make a lot of bad trades and force a lot of things, because we talked about Obi Toppin, I don't know how many times before we ended up trading for him. And we were throwing out a lot more, assets than what Indiana actually traded to New York to get him. So I think that sometimes what the value of somebody might be is not necessarily what the public eye actually thinks it is. And it could be lower, it could be higher, but Indiana has been very opportunistic, and they've made the most out of all the moves they've made. And they're very specific with those moves for a reason.
It's true, though. Indiana, I know they're not out there taking these massive swings for the fences and stuff like that, but they're consistently hitting doubles. They really are. And I think it feels like a lifetime ago that Bruce Brown was a Pacer. And I don't think that the front office gets enough credit for that signing, for overpaying Bruce Brown, knowing that he could be a valuable trade chip. And we don't make the Eastern Conference Finals without giving Bruce Brown the bag, because he ended up being the trade chip that was needed to be able to fill, that salary cap, that raw, be able to give Toronto something to be able to facilitate that trade for Siakam. Because if it wasn't Bruce Brown, it would have had to have been like a Miles Turner. And if you trade Turner and then you bring in Siakam, I don't think that you have enough to be able to make that run to the conference finals. Like, signing Bruce Brown was an underrated move that really started to, get these wheels in motion and have Indiana on like a trail that nobody expected.
No, exactly. I mean, even if you go back just a couple of years ago when they traded Caris LeVert to Cleveland, and we were all devastated that they didn't get that pick in the lottery. Well, ended up becoming a second-round pick who became Andrew freaking Nemhard. And then the next year they get Ben Shepherd, and both those guys were starting in the Eastern Conference Finals. Now, it was obviously circumstantial because Tyrese Halliburton was out, but still Ben Shepherd being trusted by the coaching staff to get the start in Games 3 and Games 4 in the Eastern Conference Finals. as a rookie is so impressive. And then Andrew Nembhard being able to put up the numbers he did as a rookie as well. Like, it just kind of shows you never really know exactly how things are going to play out when they happen in the moment, but it worked out tremendously for both Cleveland. I mean, Karis LeVert's had some really good years there, and it worked out tremendously for Indiana to get their hands on two guys that they really like. So it's really interesting. But now I wanted to hear Chad talk about how do you assess where to go next after a deep run, because that's a question I'm going to be talking about for a lot this offseason, Facci, because this is a young team, and they definitely exceeded expectations. They probably got to the Eastern Conference Finals, and they maybe shouldn't have got there if everybody's healthy, right? I don't know if everybody expects Indiana to beat Milwaukee, if Giannis plays all 6-7 games of that series, if Julius Randle, Mitch Robinson, Bojan, OG stays healthy. Like, if everybody's healthy, like, is Indiana really an Eastern Conference Finals team? That's still to be determined, right? It's hard to tell at this point because you didn't get to see them play against those other teams, but I'm curious, how do you assess where to go next after a deep run? Here's what Chad had to say.
I think going into this year, our goal was within 3 years to be, in the Eastern Conference Finals, and we woke up, and we ended up there in 1 year. So a little ahead of where we anticipated being, but it's also a great spot. Our coaches, our players really came together this year, and to get to the Eastern Conference Finals in year one of this is truly remarkable. But it also puts, us in a position of looking forward. Our job as a front office is always look forward, and I think we want to continue to be contenders in this league. We want to eventually win a championship for our fans, and this season was a great step. I think in the NBA, there's nothing that's linear. You're not going to just go to the Eastern Conference Finals and the next year you're in the finals. That's not how it works. I think we all know that. So I think the challenge is on us to continue to find ways to improve. We saw last night a team that's built to win a championship that eliminated us, and we see areas where we got to improve, both as, the roster, skill level, defensively, things like that. There's plenty of areas for us to improve, and I think that'll be a focus for us moving forward with, this summer and building the team moving forward.
I think if Chad told the fan base, we're going to make the Eastern Conference Finals in 3 years, I don't think the fan base would have been mad about that. I think it would have been like, wow, okay, yeah, step one, make the playoffs, then we'll win a playoff series, and then the Eastern Conference Finals. To do that in essentially, 1 year for what was a 3-year plan, it's tremendous. Hats off to the front office. They made, a bunch of chess moves to get to this point. But yeah, it does take the coaches and the players to really be, together as one, have that common goal. But I wish it did work out that way, where you make the conference finals this year, NBA finals next, the final year, the next year we win it all. But sometimes, like you talked about, sometimes there's the Atlanta Hawks of the situation. That was last episode, where you don't get back to this point. It's never a guarantee. The NBA, I think, you assume that, yeah, a lot of these teams will be better when they're healthier. And you don't know what other teams might make moves, big moves, like, for instance, Boston getting a Drew Holiday, or what could happen with Miami. Does Jimmy Butler move? Anything could happen. You can't take this for granted. But these players now have realistic expectations going into next season, that it's no longer success just to make the playoffs or even win the first round. This team's dreaming bigger.
I mean, even Rick Carlisle said it after they beat the Hawks, and I think everybody kind of, chuckled after he left the media room, because he was like, we're not happy just to be here. And everyone's like, well, you should be. 47 wins after just having 35 the year before. You avoid the play-in, you're a playoff team, and you're not just happy that you made the playoffs. Like, you can't even celebrate that. And he was just kind of like annoyed that was even a thought process. And he even doubled down on it today on the radio with talking about it. And I think it just kind of shows, like, if your coach is accepting the fact that, all right, we're just happy to be here, and that's the mentality your players are going to have. But I think if your coach is like, no, we're meant to be here, we can beat anybody, we're that talented, I think that kind of sets the tone all the way across the board. And then it kind of has a trickle down effect with your players, your star players, and then your role players. Everybody just buys into what's going on. So I think this is really interesting to hear Chad say, we had a goal, like, in 3 years to be an Eastern Conference Finals team. And then Pascal kind of says, moments like these don't just come often. You have to kind of embrace it for what it is. But I do know that Tyrese Halliburton today pushed back on that a little bit and said, I know that everybody says, like, don't take it for granted. You don't know how hard it is to get here. But Tyrese is more determined, like, yeah, but I want to just keep coming back here. I want to keep advancing and eventually get past the Eastern Conference Finals. Like, Tyrese was not going to hear any of that. He wanted to just be like, nope, that's fine. I will enjoy it, but I'm not going to just be content with one conference finals run because I want to continue to do that. So I think that they're really building up that right mindset, Foch. But it's great to see that this team is way ahead of schedule, and it does put more pressure on them. But I think that's good because it holds everybody accountable from the front office to the coaching staff to the players. We're striving for excellence, and anything less than that is a bummer.
No, Tyrese had a comment. It might have been a year ago. I mean, time's going fast. He said, or maybe it was earlier this year. He said, "I'm tired of losing.
This
I'm
year,
tired of." It was this year
after the Heat game on the road.
Yeah, and then it was like that was a quote that I remember a lot of people being like, "Whoa, this guy's gonna want out. He's gonna want out eventually if you're not winning." And then we're in the conference finals. Like, think about that type of run. So it just shows that the standard has been raised. Earlier in the year, it sounded kind of not like comical, but a little bit like, "All right, Rick." I remember it became like it wasn't good enough to be this 6th seed. Rick he said, "We're trying to be like the top 4 seed." I think he said like the 4th seed. And I remember it was like, okay, that might be dreaming a little bit big. That's the mentality you have to have as the coach of the team. You can't be satisfied with just, 6th seed sounds good. And you know what? That is where Indiana finished. But at the same point, they were really close to being able to finish as a 3, 4, or even a 5 seed. If a couple of those wins that you should have had went a different way, then Indiana is a top 4 seed. But you need to be maybe not even to say dreaming above, what's realistic, but you have to set the bar high that if you fall shy, you're just below that. And I think that right now, these players have that mentality that good is not good enough. They need to be great. They can be great because we didn't see this Pacers team play to their best ability against Boston, but we saw what was a less than great, performance was almost good enough to win a few games. I can't wait to see once this team can come back even better.
I will say this: I had a Boston fan / someone that covers a team reach out to me last night and just congratulate me for all the coverage that we did for the Pacers, and just said that they've been monitoring the Pacers from afar, and that their record and their seeding as a 6th seed doesn't really reflect how talented this team is and where they really could have finished at in the standings. And that's something that I brought up not too long ago. Might have been with you, I can't remember. But if Tyrese doesn't go down for those 10 games that he missed and isn't on that minutes restriction and things like that, I think there's a pretty obvious observation here that you could see the Pacers winning more than 50 games this season alone. So the Knicks were the 2 seed with 50 wins. I mean, if Tyrese Haliburton never gets hurt and this team's really able to kind of just keep pushing through, there's a chance they win 52, 53 games and they're the 2 seed, and then they have home court advantage throughout the playoffs until the Eastern Conference Finals. But I think that 1-2 matchup, they probably would have got a lot more respect than just being a lucky 6 seed that made their way through there. I think it was kind of a blessing in disguise because they didn't have the pressure. But at the same time, Tyrese was never, like, to me, 100% himself. He started to come back, had the injury, got injured again in the Eastern Conference Finals with the same hamstring. So obviously just some setbacks there. But I think that with where this team's at, like, it's kind of crazy to say, Facci, but like, they legitimately could have been the 2 seed this year if they don't have the amount of injuries. Now, there's other teams that had injuries too, so you can't take that away either. But just saying, I think that this team, like, overall on paper, they're better than a top 6 seed in the Eastern Conference.
They absolutely are. I mean, you look at this, like, there's no excuse to have lost to Portland, even with Haliburton and Siakam, or, the game that they blew, just losing to the Wizards, or, every other Brooklyn. I mean, I'm naming all these games that I was at, unfortunately, but it's just like, there's so many opponents that we were better than that we
man,
short. So I just feel that, and that's a couple wins. Like, you got to think of it as like of how close Indiana was to being, the 5th seed or the 4th seed. It's like that became 1 or 2 games. So realistically, the fact that they could have won 50 games just sounds like something so far-fetched, but it actually was within reach. And I think that next year, Indiana will have the win totals to be able to back up their talent. So I think that if they can put it all together, just, remain healthy, sky's the limit for next year. It really is, even with the rest of the league getting healthy as well.
Yeah, and I think the next question that Chad's going to talk about here is just great, kind of a segue here, because he's going to talk about the next steps of team building with a young roster. That's something that's very hard to do, is continue to build a roster when everybody's so young, unpolished, and you're still trying to figure things out. And there's so many guys that you want to see play, but how do you balance trying to find playing time, trying to make a move? I think that's really interesting. So here's what Chad had to say next.
A good young team, there's lots of them out there. I mean, we were fortunate to get to where we got to this year, but there's other teams out there that are very comparable to us. And, trying to continue on this growth curve takes a lot of work internally. It takes a lot of work from your players to learn from the lessons that they just experienced over the last few weeks. Us as a front office, we look at the draft, we'll look at trades if they're out there, we look at free agency. Those are our tools to try to improve the team. But we're always going to weigh is what's out there better than what we have internally. Is what we have internally, could that get to be at the level where what the trade opportunity or free agent market might be out there? So you're always looking at your own young guys. What signs are they giving you that they're going to continue to grow and get better? Are they good workers? Are they committed to putting in the time? Are they committed to, be a good teammate? So we're looking for those signs internally, which helps you decide, do you need to go external to try to add to the team? And, the draft this year, we're limited a little bit because we don't have a first-round pick, but that's not to say we won't try to be aggressive if there's something out there to try to help, address some needs that we have.
A lot of options out there. I mean, when you do have a young roster, it's tough. You could just simply run it back, and maybe that is good enough. If everybody does get 10% better, maybe that does, get the job done. But there are also a lot of young teams that we're seeing in this league. Like you look at what Minnesota did and OKC, other teams that are continuously getting better with what they do have. But I think that Indiana does still have a couple picks. They got 3 picks in this draft. Trades have always been, how they've been able to build this team. When you look at like a Tyrese Halliburton or Pascal Siakam or an Aaron Nesmith, free agency, I don't expect them to be big players. I think they'll probably look to, retain their own. But, they have every right to look out there, see what could be done. And those draft picks, I mean, Chad's talking about being aggressive. This Pacers team always talks about being aggressive. I think they were aggressive when it came to Pascal Siakam. So for that, we can't just have it go in one ear and out the other. But for the picks, you can make an argument that it's like if you have an opportunity to move those picks for any player that can help now, I think that's a great idea because if Jarace Walker couldn't get playing time last year, what makes you think that the 36th overall pick is really going to be able to contribute on this team? Never say never when you got later guys like an Andrew Nembhard contributing big time. So maybe I'm eating those words. But I think if you can flip 2 second-round picks for Obi Toppin, I'd be curious to see what you can get for the 36th pick and something else.
Yeah, they've got 2 other second-round picks. I highly doubt they keep any of the second-round ones that are super late. I can see them maybe keeping 36. Yeah, they're in the 49s and the 50s. Like, they don't have roster space for that. They really don't have a lot of, room for guys to develop like that. So I don't see them going that route. But it is nice to know that they do have flexibility because really after this draft, they've only given up the 2026 first-round pick. So they have other picks they can trade if there is a star that becomes available. And I think with the new CBA and everything, teams kind of last year maybe overreacted to it, and now they're kind of stuck in a pickle. Could they be looking to make a trade? Could Indiana be opportunistic and kind of find somebody available that's maybe, not the biggest name star, but they are, a secondary guy that could help out? You just never know who's going to become available, what's going to happen. Could they get themselves involved in a sign and trade or, whatever? We've seen teams do that as well throughout the NBA. So it'll be interesting to see. But you talked about Pascal Siakam, and that is like the $1 million question going into the offseason. Will he sign a max contract? I do not have this clip because Dustin Dopirak did ask Chad that. He was like, I can't give you an answer on that. But Tony East did ask him about, what he liked about his play this year, it's kind of his long-term future and his fit here with the team. So here's what Chad had to say about Pascal Siakam.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much into the contract stuff, but Pascal was a great fit. Obviously, we targeted him in the trade. I've liked him for a long time, and I thought he came in and was a tremendous piece, to the puzzle for us and had major impact on the team, both on the court and the locker room. He was a great fit. His personality, his leadership, his experience was very valuable to a lot of our young players. And, he had a great playoff run for us too. And he seems to be happy here. And we're obviously happy with him and, hope that, this is something long-term for both sides.
Big part of this team, probably an understatement. Tremendous piece of the puzzle. Absolutely. I think that, you felt Siakam's, what he brought to the table pretty much immediately. It just felt like he fit in, seamlessly, whether it was on the court, off the court, in the locker room. Like this was someone that had that championship experience that Indiana lacked. There was no one else on this roster that was a champion once you traded Bruce Brown. So it sounds like, that they both want a long-term relationship. I think all signs point to that. Siakam said, he hasn't given any impressions that he wants to be elsewhere. And remember what it was like for Siakam before teams traded for him. There was that big impression out there. Oh, I'm not going to sign a long-term deal there. There has been none of that since he's become a Pacer. So that plus the run to the conference finals, I just feel like they'll get something worked out, but no one ever fully shows their hand to say, hey, we're going to offer him a max contract on, the second weekend. I think we need to trust the front office. When they made that trade for Siakam, they had a plan to bring him back. I don't think that anything could have went better than how this run went with Siakam.
No, I totally agree. And I mean, just to kind of say some other things that aren't on this video clip, Tyrese Halliburton and Rick Carlisle today said, Tyrese said, I'm going to do whatever I can to be a part of that recruiting pitch to make sure Pascal Siakam gets that max extension. And then also Rick Carlisle said it twice today, once on the radio and once in his exit interviews with the media. Like, my number one goal this offseason is to recruit Pascal Siakam back to Indiana. And he said, look, you guys think that some players are just automatically going to come back. You don't have to worry about it. He said, when I was in Dallas, I recruited Dirk every single time he was an unrestricted free agent because I didn't want him to feel like he didn't belong here, that we just expected him to come back. We wanted to make sure we stressed to him the value that we felt he added to our team. And so I think when you're getting that kind of level of, we want you on this team, just wanting to be wanted, that makes me feel more and more like, okay, they realize Pascal is probably going to get a max deal. He, Chad wouldn't get into the numbers with Dustin, but I appreciate Dustin at least asking. But it's tough. It really is tough to go out there and publicly say what you're going to do. But I think that getting Pascal locked up long term just makes this team better. And I think everybody kind of saw this run they had, how fun it was, how they incorporated Pascal. And we really didn't get to see a ton of Tyrese and Pascal in the regular season to kind of develop. I'd be really curious to see what that looks like over an 82-game schedule and just how much more they can have that connectivity together and just get more familiar with one another.
Yeah, Pascal kind of got thrown in there, and when he got thrown in there, it was right when Halliburton had gotten hurt, and it was just, hey, I don't want to say sink or swim because he's obviously an all NBA level talent, but he played very well, but I also feel that he could play even better with more chemistry with this team. We saw, in his shooting percentages would have been career highs. So I think that he definitely fits this team very well. And I think that all signs point to them being able to work out a long-term deal. Anybody, and I mean anybody who thinks that the Pacers should not re-sign Pascal Siakam, you are crazy, because once you saw what that alternative would be, you would regret that statement, because if the Pacers didn't bring back Siakam, it's not like they're just going to go, big fish hunting where they're going to sign some other all-NBA type player. This is the guy that wants to be here. And Halliburton, if he says he's going to do everything he can to get this deal done, I trust Tyrese Halliburton. That man is a recruiter. And, hey, leave your hands in the trust of the front office and Tyrese.
Absolutely. And I will say this, whether Siakam signs or not, there is more questions about the power forward position. And Obi Toppin is also a restricted free agent. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of contract he demands on the open market. But in terms of his overall fit and what he did this season, here's what Chad had to say about Obi Toppin.
Yeah, I thought Obi was had a tremendous year for us. He brings a lot of things that we look for and qualities in a person. He loves being in the gym. He loves being part of a team. Brings a great attitude, a great smile, a great infectious energy every day, which adds to your culture and adds to the vibe of your team. And we had an idea that's what he was going to be about. You never know until you get him in your building. He's around your team, and he's been beyond everything that we hoped he'd be. And then on the court, I thought he really blossomed as the year grew on. We envisioned him being a good fit with a team that played fast, and he was exactly that. His three-point shooting really developed and improved as we saw this year. The way we play, you get a lot of open shots, and if you can catch and shoot, you're going to have some success, and he did that. His defense grew as the season wore on, and had major impact in a lot of playoff games for us. So very happy with the fit. He seems to be happy here too as well. So would like to continue the relationship. It's all part of the business when you get into the contract situation. But really, really happy with Obi as a Pacer.
I mean, look, how could you argue it? I mean, Chad said it great. He thought Obi had a tremendous year for the Pacers. Loved his qualities, gym rat, great teammate, infectious attitude. That is everything that I feel like you're looking for in a teammate. I feel like Obi always had a smile on his face. The three-point shooting was a big question. Could he develop into a three-point shooter? We didn't really see it in New York. He definitely developed. He was a 40% three-point shooter on the year, and his defense, it was there at times. Everybody remembers that performance against Jimmy Butler earlier on in the year. That was great. He had his moments where he could block shots or pull down rebounds. A little bit inconsistent, but I do think that the fit was there. Indiana wanted someone that could get out and run. They knew the type of style they wanted to play, and Obi definitely fit that style. I think that's probably the question mark. I think as much this offseason is, does Indiana bring back Obi? I think they would like to, but what is that number at? Nobody knows. Nobody knows what that number could be. But one thing you really want to give Obi credit for is his availability. Managed to play all 82 games this year. I feel like that was really important. Because the guy played 83 games this year if you were to count the in-season tournament. And then remember, Alex, this guy rolled his ankle at the end of the regular season, and it looked pretty bad.
Yeah.
Didn't skip a beat. Actually ended up having some huge playoff games for the Pacers, and they really needed what he brought in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying that Obi Toppin had a really good year, and I will say this. I remember on Twitter at the end of the season when people were kind of getting ready for their playoff previews, I saw an NBA analyst tweet out, Obi Toppin shot 40% from three this year, question mark? And I thought to myself, man, people just sleep on the Pacers. They're not paying attention, but Obi Toppin went from a starting power forward to the backup power forward, didn't ever complain about his role, which you have to love that about him. And I understand, like, it's probably hard. Like, you come here, have this great opportunity, and it wasn't really working out early on, but then all of a sudden, you find your role as the backup power forward. You were really pivotal and changed a lot of games for Indiana and the playoffs just by coming in, being a spark. You said it, getting out and running. Like, Obi Toppin fits exactly what this team wants to do. It's just a matter of cost and opportunity for other players behind him, like a Jarace Walker, who they drafted last year. If they view, Jarace as someone that they want to see long term at the four, I think that's still to be determined where they want to see him finish at, or eventually land at, I should say, in terms of like what position he plays. But I just think having so many different guys that are versatile is really pivotal to see, because you saw it in that Celtics series, and even throughout the Bucks series and things like that. When they needed to go small, they would play Obi at the 5 with Pascal at the 4. And when Miles was kind of dealing with his back injury last night and just not being 100% healthy, and then the Celtics were kind of attacking Miles, they started attacking Obi as well. So Obi will have to grow defensively, I think, to really be a long-term fit here and really get that extra playing time that he wants, especially if Jarace continues to develop and get better. But I will ask you this. You talked about the money. We'll get into that a little bit later. But to me, and I know this sounds crazy to talk about right now because the season just ended, but like, the Pacers need to get more contracts that have a little bit of money on them if they want to make trades.
Yes.
And I think this is where Obi Toppin could be valuable. You have his restricted free agency, you have his bird rights. So if somebody wants to offer him around 13 to 15 million a year for 2 to 3 years, maybe you go ahead and match that, just because one, he fits your system, and two, if you pair his salary up with somebody else's, that could be enough to go out there and really get you a difference maker that you want for the long term, if you don't want Obi for the long term for whatever reason, or you just want to upgrade the roster. So that is one thing I'm keeping an eye on.
That's a good point, because I feel like right now you look at this team and like Turner will be an expiring free agent, going into next season at around 19 million or so, about $20 million. So that's that other contract that you have. But like, if you trade Turner, you don't have anybody behind him. And then you look at the other contracts, like you're not going to move a Tyrese or a Siakam if you can re-sign him. So then it drops down to Aaron Nesmith at about $11 million. You need Aaron Nesmith right now. So I don't think that the Pacers do have a lot of those potential contracts. So that is actually a really great point by you, because there's a lot of players on this roster where your Nemhard's at, $2 million and change, or, Jalen Smith, who knows his situation, at just under $6 million, or Mathurin at 7, that really don't add up to that much. So that is a great point. I don't know what his number will be. I think it could be anywhere between 10 to 15 million dollars. I know that's a wide range, probably 12 to 15 million, but even 15 could be a little bit of a stretch. But we'll see what happens if somebody strikes out in free agency and still has some extra cap that they need to spend, like we saw for the Pacers, where you have to spend at least 90% of your cap. And Indiana had that money for Bruce Brown. It was an overpay. Maybe somebody overpays for Obi Toppin.
You just never know. And I mean, if it's a similar deal, like a 1-for-1 type thing, it could be worth the money for Obi Toppin if he's not getting the offer that he wants. But speaking of somebody that the Pacers have a team option on, that's TJ McConnell. Now, they could decline his option, and I think they would cut off half the salary if they didn't want to keep McConnell. But let's be honest, they're not doing that. TJ McConnell, There's some great stuff here from Chad that you're going to love. Just kind of going through in kind of chronological order, explaining how this season went from McConnell to where it started to where it finished. So here's what Chad Buchanan had to say about the year that TJ McConnell had and how it might change the outlook on how they viewed McConnell for the future.
Phenomenal year for TJ. I mean, I think we were kind of joking in his exit interview. If he would have done a journal from the start of the season to the end, well, that would have been some must-see or must-read, however you say that, from where it started, for what he thought the situation was going to be, maybe not playing, not in the rotation, to being compared to Michael Jordan in the Eastern Conference Finals by Jaylen Brown. That's quite the contrast from start to finish. But I mean, I don't know what you can say more about TJ, what he has meant, to this team, beloved by his teammates, his coaches, the staff, the fans. I mean, he's what you want an Indiana Pacer to be about. And, this season, I mean, he's 32 years old, but he's not slowing down. I mean, I don't think you see any sign of an aging player. He's still got his competitive drive. He still brings it every single night. Very effective at the highest level we saw over the last couple of weeks, and his shooting's improved. And his value to us is obviously is very, very high, and that has not changed by anything that happened this year. And hope that he's with us for a long time as well.
Yeah, I mean, from start of the year to finish, I don't think anybody's role changed as much as TJ McConnell. Maybe you can make an argument for Ben Shepherd, but not in terms of the impact. McConnell going from out of the rotation, third string point guard, to Jaylen Brown, comparing him to Michael Jordan in the Eastern Conference Finals, that's something you can't make up. And I think that Chad did talk about it. If McConnell did keep a journal throughout the year, that is a journal that I would have liked to have read, and many other people, even if it's invading his privacy, because you don't read a man's journal, but that would be some interesting stuff. But he also mentioned, look, phenomenal year for TJ. His teammates love him, the coaches love him, the fans love him. It's like, when you mentioned before how they could decline his option, that would break hearts in Indiana, and he ain't making the type of money that you decline. So I feel like it's a blessing that TJ McConnell is still under contract, even if it's just for one more year. And Chad was not afraid to say that he hopes it's actually long-term with the Pacers.
No, I think it needs to be. I mean, TJ McConnell is somebody that we praised last night on the episode, and I don't want to repeat everything I just said, but basically just go back and listen to that clip, and I'll insert it here. I mean, I can't say enough great things about TJ McConnell and what he's meant. I put a tweet out today on Tuesday, just kind of congratulating him on the season that he had and explaining just the ride that it's been. And I know Chad kind of echoed that by going a little bit deeper into it. But it's just one thing I love about him is even when he was out of the rotation, Facci, he made it not about himself, but about the guys that were younger getting the opportunity in front of him, and fully embracing the mentorship. And he didn't sulk. He didn't pout. He didn't like the answer, but you know what he did? He came to work every day and did the exact same thing. And like I mentioned in my tweet today, whether it was a Tuesday night against the Washington Wizards or Game 7 in the Garden against the New York Knicks to advance to the Eastern Conference Finals, he brought the same level of intensity every single night, because that's just who TJ McConnell is. He just embodies what Pacers basketball is all about. So I think that you cannot afford to lose somebody like that. I think if they were to let TJ McConnell go off this roster, it would be almost equivalent to when Indiana traded Danny Granger away for Evan Turner, trying to make the roster better technically on paper, because Danny Granger was dealing with injuries, couldn't play, whatever. And there might be a move out there like, hey, if we include McConnell in this deal, we could get X amount of player. Well, does that player really lift the bar that much higher? Because you cannot take away what a mentor means, what a leader means, what experience means, and just knowing what this culture is all about. This fan base is so attached to TJ McConnell. I think there's probably more McConnell fans now than there were Danny Granger fans at some point. I mean, just the amount of cheers that we're getting for TJ McConnell. I mean, every 60-year-old mother in the world, I mean, even they're turning the channel on to watch TJ McConnell play. So we got everybody watching TJ McConnell play basketball, and it's great to see. But the Pacers cannot afford to let someone like this go. That means so much to this team on and off the court.
To this day, I don't like Evan Turner because of how much I loved Danny Granger. And I think that whoever came in, if they were traded for McConnell, they would have some big shoes to fill, and they would likely fall shy because you can't replace all the stuff that McConnell brings to the table that will never show up in a box score. I mean, there was even that moment in, I think it was game 3, where it's like, it showed McConnell turns to like Jarace Walker to Obi Toppin. He tells him he loves him. He's leaning up, against the bench. And it's like, people can just feel like that type of love that these players have for each other, but how like McConnell is a lot of like the glue that's keeping this team together. So yeah, I mean, stuff like that void that happens in a locker room once a player like that leaves, Indiana ain't ready for that, especially for how young this team is. Someone like McConnell is the vet, he's like a vet that these guys will look back on and talk, very highly on for years to come.
I mean, we're going to go now, Facci, from probably the most beloved vet on this roster to the most beloved young player on this roster, and that's Jarace Walker. I mean, every single time we would tweet anything, how many times would we get comments back? Why won't they play Jarace? Can Jarace play? What's wrong with Jarace? Is Rick hate Jarace? Is Jarace in jail? Like, whatever. No, this is what's happening with Jarace Walker. Chad Buchanan gives you a little bit behind the scenes of how they view him, what he went through this year, and kind of the future potential for Jarace Walker. So here's what Chad had to say on Jarace Walker.
Sure. When we drafted Jarace, I think we saw potential for a two-way player. I think we saw a potential for a guy that could make plays with the ball, could really pass, had a high IQ. We saw him as probably a backup 4, maybe early in his career, whether that was his first year, second year, however long that took. And as we got into the season, as he got experience playing the G League, as we watched him in practice, his three-point shooting really came along, which was a great, surprise for us, I could say. And we saw more potential of him playing some wing position minutes, which is valuable. The more positions a guy can play, the more valuable he becomes. He obviously didn't get a ton of opportunity this year, and that was, reflective. I mean, going back to Obi, he played 82 games this year, which is a badge of honor in the NBA. And so some of it takes, things got to fall into place for a young player to get an opportunity, and it didn't happen very often for Jarace. But that doesn't have anything to say about our belief in him long term. As we told him in his exit interview, your growth and development is a big component of us taking another step. Whether that's, immediately or a year or two down the road, but we still big believers in Jarace and think there's a lot of things that he can do that this roster needs.
I mean, Chad talked about it. Look, I think Jarace was that hot topic everybody wants to know more about. They said they first saw the potential in him as like a two-way player and sort of as like a backup 4 for a year or two, but like he did gain great experience in the G League. His three-point shot did improve solidly as the year went on, but also did make a fair point. Like Obi Toppin did play 82 games. If Obi was not as healthy or didn't have as good of a year, then Jarace Walker does play more. But I think that Obi was a big part of the bench's success. And I think for Jarace, it always left a little bit something more to be desired. This fan base talks about that Clippers game as if it was, the most magical moment. We know what we saw with our eyes. This man can play. But Chad did say the belief in Jarace is still really high and that there is a lot that Jarace can do that this team needs. And I couldn't agree more, because what he brings to the table, a lot of players on this team don't possess. It feels like Jarace can be a Swiss Army knife of a lot of different things that this team needs. And there's a lot of players that maybe have 1 or 2 skill sets that are very specific. Well, it feels like Jarace has the potential to have many.
For sure. And I mean, I think Jarace Walker could be a kind of what Chad was alluding to earlier when talking about maybe that piece on the roster that develops into the player that they need. I mean, that definitely could be him. I think everybody wants to say, oh, it's probably Ben Mathurin if he can kind of figure things out, because he's already showed he's got the offensive prowess to go out there and be a force. But defensively, we've yet to see it, where I think Jarace is probably a little bit more established defensively with his he's more just of a defensive-minded player, I guess you could say. Still could be much more disciplined. That's part of just being young and figuring things out, and I think he will. Ben Shepard, Andrew Nembhard, second-year players, but they're also in their mid-20s right now almost. So they had the college experience that both Benedict and Jarace did not have. So I think that Jarace, it'll be interesting to kind of see what his future looks like here on this team. But I think that Indiana could really utilize him and could get the best out of him with the style they want to play. I think he would really fit. And to me, like, there was parts of me that even wanted to see him play in these games 3 and games 4 against Boston, just to kind of see what he could do. Like, could he do anything impactful defensively that maybe just changes like 2 or 3 minutes of a game? Not saying he's going to be out there in closing time, but could he have just done something, to go out there and have some kind of experience? We don't know. But The guy that does know is Rick Carlisle Facci. And while everyone has had their opinions on Rick throughout the year, and I even heard national people, I think Mike Greenberg even said it was a Hall of Fame coach that did not have a Hall of Fame coaching series against the Celtics. A lot of miscues by Rick, whatever. This is what Chad Buchanan had to say about their head coach, Rick Carlisle, and what he's meant to this franchise since he's got here.
I think he's been phenomenal. I mean, he's accepted, like I said, essentially a team that's kind of rebuilding down a different path. And he's a Hall of Fame coach. He's won a championship, and he could have easily said, "I'm not going to coach a team that's going to take a longer term look." And to his credit, he's embraced it and he's loved it. He loves teaching young players that are receptive to being coached. He loves being around a team that's got great leadership. He's got a great staff that supports him. He's a very creative. He's built one of the best, offenses this league's seen in a long, long time this season. And, it's a joy to be around. The players respect the crap out of him. I mean, he's just a smart, brilliant basketball mind, and he's done a phenomenal job for us.
How could you not love the job that Rick did? I mean, when the Pacers signed Rick back to come back to coach this team, that's when this franchise turned around. I know it took a little bit, but it didn't take long. And I think that Chad is right to say that he has done a phenomenal job. The Pacers are back. He accepted a rebuilding team when, he didn't have to. And I think that wasn't the plan initially. Initially, the Pacers had Sabonis and Chris Duarte and Karis LeVert and guys that, were a little bit maybe older, a little bit more seasoned. And I love how we're throwing, Duarte as being older in there. But, it was a team that was ready to be a playoff team. And then they kind of broke it down. You made a big trade for Halliburton, and all of a sudden, Rick embraced it, and he went with it. And he has actually loved this player development that we're seeing, and the players have bought into him. And I feel like there's just this great dynamic right now, and it's so forgotten about. But that 1 year with Nate Bjorkman was just such a disaster across the board that it felt like players didn't enjoy playing for him. I don't know if he enjoyed coaching them. It was totally off. And with Rick, it just feels that there is a sense of love and wanting to play hard. And from an offensive standpoint, I mean, how could you be anything less than in love with what you saw when this was the most prolific offense the NBA has seen in the last 40 years?
This is a totally different Rick Carlisle than we're accustomed to knowing. I saw a clip today on YouTube. It was the greatest double bangs from Mike Breen in NBA history. And one of them was the Luka Doncic game winner in the bubble against the Clippers when Rick Carlisle was there and Mike Weiner was on the bench. And I was just laughing because Carlisle is wearing a mask, but he's jumping up and down after Luka Doncic hits that shot. Mike Weiner is smiling from ear to ear, just so excited. And then you hear all the reports about, Luka and Rick hated each other, blah, 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 blah. It was time for Rick to move on. And I get it. Rick is kind of one of those personalities, like Miles Turner said in the Michael Scotto press conference, or the interview, the podcast they did, but he's a little quirky. And Rick is definitely a different guy. He has a lot of great stories that he can tell you from just being around basketball for as long as he's been around, going back to his playing days with the Boston Celtics and Bill Walton, things like that. But he loves the game of basketball. And one thing that I really appreciate about Rick is as he's gone from being this offensive coordinator for for Larry Bird back in the 90s Pacers teams to being a defensive minded coach with the Detroit Pistons and then Indiana when he came here, he's been able to adapt to every style and every era of NBA basketball. And instead of bashing it, he just praises all these different eras. So I think that one thing that I've heard a lot of players say is he doesn't sugarcoat anything. He's real with you. He's down to earth. And Turner said on our show, there's no BS with him. He just tells you how it is. And I think that you can kind of expect, you know what to expect going into it. So while there's people that don't love Rick, and I understand that he's a human being and he does make mistakes and he's not totally perfect in everything that he does, he's a very good coach that has elevated this team to another level that they wouldn't even be at if you didn't have this kind of structure in place to get them there. So, I've been an advocate for Rick Carlisle since he's been here. I know that there's things that I wish he would do differently sometimes, but at the same time, I know that what's best for this team, what's best for these young players that he's trying to develop, it's hard to do that when you have so many of them trying to develop and also trying to win very big in these moments. So kudos to Rick Carlisle, the job he's done. I think Chad Buchanan probably just has to feel so relieved to have a coaching staff that he can trust compared to maybe the guy that they hired before Rick Carlisle that barely made it a season.
it ain't easy to find head coaches that work out. I mean, there's some teams that are blessed to have, and then there's other teams that continuously just go through a cycle of having, a coach for 1 or 2 years at a time, and then you move on, and then you kind of you're forced to almost kind of rebuild again. And then every now and then there's a coach like, in Cleveland, how, Bickerstaff lost the locker room, they said, and just they had a good team in place, but sometimes you need that voice that everybody can, respect and, follow their lead. And I feel like Rick has that voice with the Pacers. They follow his lead. He sets the tone, and the players have bought in. And I think that right now, the front office, to your point, they should be very relieved because Carlisle earned that extension that he got before the year. There were some people who thought maybe they might have gave that extension out a little premature. I disagree. Where the Pacers are going right now, I think that was another underrated move to be able to extend Rick, especially long before they went on this run.
Facci, we have about 5 or 6 more categories we could talk about, but I don't want to get into all of them because I feel like this has been a lengthy podcast as it is already. So we're going to skip a few down on the list that we have here, and we're just going to go jumping right into what Chad Buchanan said about going after the right player and kind of building piece by piece. And so I talked about it earlier when he talked about how Boston built their team and Denver built their team. He kind of talks about it here in this moment too. So I wanted to kind of close things out by talking about going after the right player and building a roster piece by piece. So here's what Chad Buchanan had to say on that.
Yeah, the reality is we've only had Pascal for half of a season. And, he's been such a big part of the team, but he hasn't had a full training camp with us. He hasn't really settled into Indy yet. And I think that's part of our thinking, is we got to find the right guy. If we're going to make a big move, our scouting staff, we do a lot of work on backgrounds of players, their work ethic, their character, what type of locker room influence they are, and how are they going to fit with us. So it's got to be the right move if you're going to make a move. And it's, you can say, teams can go all in at the moment. I think Boston's a great example. They did piece by piece at a time. Denver kind of did piece by piece at a time. And that's what I think is the model we're trying to follow, trying to add piece by piece by piece and being very selective on what you try to add to this group. But we'll always be looking out there. If there's the right player that fits our timeline, that fits our culture and fits our locker room, we will be aggressive, but it's got to be the right player.
I wish it happened overnight, but it simply doesn't. I mean, when you look at how the Pacers have built, you want to talk about piece by piece. Getting Tyrese Haliburton was the piece that started everything. He allowed you to even have a puzzle to even build. And I think that when Chad used Boston and Denver as a great example, it's like, I remember, to be honest, a couple years ago, 2 seasons ago, when Boston traded for Derek White, I was like, 2 first-round picks for Derek White? I don't know about that. And I'm eating those words. That's an all-NBA defender right there that played really big against the Pacers and sadly hit the game-winning shot in Game 4. You look at then they go after Drew Holiday. Well, that's a guy that made game-winning plays in this series and is an all-world defender. You look at Denver a couple years ago. Remember, they traded for your boy Aaron Gordon, a couple first-round picks. That felt pretty steep at the time. They don't win a championship without Aaron Gordon or KCP. Those are 2 players that really kind of set the tone defensively with what Denver wanted to do. And I felt like that's what you need to do. Slowly, little by little, use your picks in the right way to go after the right player when they come about. You don't need to trade, 5 picks for one guy and just all of a sudden you're like Cleveland that goes from not being a great team to now you're all in because you traded for Donovan Mitchell. Well, you better start winning now. And look where they are. So I think that Chad used some good examples of the last NBA champion and what could be the next NBA champion.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's a great point because both these teams had their guys in place. They had Jokic and they had Jamal Murray. So they're like, what surrounding pieces can we put around them? And they're like the perfect fit. Aaron Gordon, perfect kind of defensive, hybrid guy. And even Aaron Gordon is like first half season there really didn't like truly understand what his role was going to be, but then embrace it the next season once he got a full season under his belt. And then KCP has just been that awesome 3-and-D type player, and he won a championship with the Lakers and the Nuggets. So he's one of those guys that he knows what he's supposed to do. But then another guy we didn't mention on the Nuggets run was Bruce Brown. Some of the Pacers went after. Like going after him and getting him on a cheap deal was massive. So I think that's huge. And then you talk about it with what Boston was able to do. They traded Aaron Nesmith. They were able to get back Malcolm Brogdon. They were able to get Robert Williams signed to an extension, and they trade both those guys and get a guy in Drew Holiday, because you know what? Milwaukee said, we're excited that Dame's available, and we're going to go out there and make a big splashy move to break our roster up, and they do it. But like you said, piece by piece, and even the Celtics getting Porzingis from Washington, and they traded Marcus Smart away, and everybody thought, how do you trade Marcus Smart away? He's been kind of like the heart and soul of that team. He was the vet for Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Like, what are you doing? But it was like they realized that the writing was on the wall, that ceiling had been reached, and they could not do it anymore. And so they made the right trades here, later on. So I think some of these teams had a little bit more success than Indiana has had so far in this young rebuild with Tyrese Haliburton at the helm. So it'll take some time, I think, to really know what's happening. But the big piece to me was, like you said, getting Tyrese. But like, once you've established that foundation, you've gone through your draft and you've drafted your guys. But then for the players you've acquired, you basically have gone out and got Nesmith. You went out and got Toppin, and you went out and you got Pascal Siakam. So now, how do you continue to build on that as well? And I think that's where you're just going to continue to see, like, everybody loves, every fan loves most of the players on this team. So when you trade one of these guys, it's going to be very emotional. It's going to be like, oh man, should they really do that? Are they really going to break this up? But I think a lot of Boston fans are probably like, felt like a gut punch probably when they traded Marcus Smart away. I can only imagine how some of those Boston fans felt, especially when they got an injury-prone Kristaps Porzingis in return, probably feeling like, are we messing things up too much? But I think sometimes you just have to, like, front offices know and coaches know when it is time to make a move, and not just continuing to run it back, because Indiana struggled with that for a little bit there with the Turner-Sabonis pairing, and they did wait probably they waited the right amount of time before they broke it up, because they got Tyrese back in return. But still, it just kind of shows, these players and these coaching staffs and these front office members, like, you can get kind of caught up in your own little world and think, we got what it takes. But if there is a player out there that makes a lot of sense and can really help change the dynamic of your team, if a Drew Holiday becomes available for Indiana or a Derek White becomes available, you have to be opportunistic. You have to make that move.
You do. And I think that even though the Pacers did make that move for Siakam, it was 2 first-round picks in 2024, a weak draft class that most experts are saying. And then, so it really is just that 2026 pick that you mentioned, but they also preserve their young talent that, maybe that those are, trade chips if everything doesn't work out. Like they didn't empty the cupboard completely. So I think that is important, because you never know what that piece might be. Maybe it's a small piece, like an Obi Toppin or an Aaron Nesmith, guys that can be obtained without breaking the bank. So just stay ready, because piece by piece, that's how you build the championship team. You look at the Phoenix Suns, they jumped the gun. All of a sudden, they just wanted to win it all. And at this point, they are basically out of assets. They really are, pretty heavily strapped, where it's going to be hard to sign just about anybody. And, Nurkic is really the only guy that they can trade right now for essentially anybody. Yeah. So it's going to be tough for a team like Phoenix to see, what they do. But for a team like Indiana, you still have options to get better with this group or be able to add to it. And I think that's that flexibility that Indiana has done a great job of preserving.
Absolutely, Vach. I think it's going to be just a fascinating season, and see what really happens. Off season is going to be fun. Well, we'll get into more of what we think should happen. We're going to save our opinions really until we get into a little bit closer to that time. But we got some breaking news here, Facci. Chad Buchanan did a great press conference with the media, but Chad Buchanan is going to be joining this podcast on Sunday night at 9 p.m. Setting the pace, fans. Make sure you guys tune in late Sunday night, early Monday morning. We're going to have Chad Buchanan himself on, and I always feel like in these kind of environments, these kind of setting interviews, it feels a little bit less polished. We're able to kind of get more of a laid-back Chad, kind of get his thoughts on everything. And he's not going to tell us anything that he wouldn't tell the media as well, because he knows it is out there in the public. But we're going to be able to ask him maybe a little bit more questions, be a little bit more informal with our conversations. I think you guys are going to really enjoy that. But thought this was a great way to kind of head into our little break here, Facci, that we're about to take, because me and you are going to take the next 4 days off. We'll be back on Sunday night. We just needed a break. It's been a long run with this run. So my voice has been shot for like a week and a half now. I've been fighting through this cold, whatever I've been going through. I don't even know what it is at this point, but I needed time to relax, refresh, and get ready. And I thought, what better way to come back than to talk to the, GM of the Indiana Pacers, Chad Buchanan.
laid back Chad, my favorite Chad. I feel like these conversations, I think that, it takes time to build these type of relationships. And I think that at this point, I don't know, Chad is making either his third or fourth appearance on Set the Pace. Either way, it's always a great conversation to have, especially coming off of a year like this. I remember Chad just saying, hey, look, let's just see where we're at in January of this team before we make any, any judgments. And look at us now. So, I can't wait for that conversation. Some people on social media were asking us today, are you guys done now that the offseason is here? No, we are not done. We got Chad Buchanan coming your way. Don't worry. Sit back. We have great conversations, great episodes that are going to be coming to you guys all offseason. There's no better way to kick that off than with the man himself, Chad Buchanan, coming back on Setting the Pace.
Absolutely, man. It's going to be a lot of fun. But Facci, we're going to go ahead and let everybody know where they can find us at on social media.
Absolutely. So you can find us on Twitter at PacersPod, STP. You can find Alex on Twitter at AlexGoldenNBA. I can be found on Twitter at _FACCI. You can find us on Instagram at PacersPod, STP. You can find us on Facebook at Setting the Pace. You can find us on TikTok at Setting the Pace. And Alex, tell them where they can check us out on YouTube.
Ladies and gentlemen, go to youtube.com/Setting the Pace, a Pacers podcast. We can find all of our video content. And please give us a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to this at on the audio platform, because that helps us out a lot. We've got a few reviews as of late, so thank you to those who have helped us out and done that. But if you're listening at this point in the podcast, you haven't turned it off yet, please go leave us a 5-star rating and review if you have not, because it does help the show. But with that being said, we're going to take a few days off, don't forget, and we'll be back on Sunday night. But Facci, if you're excited for this conversation coming up with Chad Buchanan on our next episode, hit me with those 3 words.
Let's go, Pacers!